Tremendous session lined up for you today. You can see in a corner here, we have Dirck de Kleer joining us to do a dedicated session on first-gen grads. And I have to say, first-gen grads is a term that when I went to grad school, I never realized or really thought of myself as a first gen. And by first gen, what we're really talking about here are people who are going to grad school for the first time in their families. And that sets up a special set of challenges that we're going to dig in deep to, the things that you need to know, be aware of that you may never have thought about before. So if you've ever felt like maybe feel like other students are just have a foot in front of you, they're a step ahead, they get heard more, people pay more attention to them, their professors have more time for them, they seem to get more opportunities, or they're effortlessly gliding from one success to another. And if you ever feel like you're missing out, this is a session for you. You're going to want to stay tuned until the very end, because what we're going to do throughout is I'm going to make sure I drop 3 important gold nuggets that you're going to need as a first-gen grad to really succeed. And the reason why you want to hear this from me and from Dirk as well is because both of us have had bumpy roads along the way. I know I had my back up against the wall. I dropped out of undergrad at one point, and I almost was about to fail out of grad school. And it was only really when I got the right guidance and support and mentorship along the way that I was really able to fly and do the things that I never even knew I needed to do to really thrive as a grad student. Flash forward, I got on the tenure track at Harvard University, became a full professor at Oxford University, and now I set up Fast Track Grad, this open access community where I'm tremendously passionate about trying to serve grads and help you avoid some of these common pitfalls that I fell into as a grad. And you're going to hear from Dirk and also later on Elaine, who's joining us, some of these common struggles. They're all too common that rarely get talked about. And this is the community and this is the space for us to have these conversations. So what I want you to do in the chat, good morning, Tyrone. Really good to have you join us here. What I want you to do is I want all of you to pop messages into the live chat for us so that we can cover your critical questions. And if you like something, be sure to let others know that you like it, because these are very common challenges and struggles that we're going to be talking about today. So let other people know in the community, if you've been grappling with some of these same things. And as ever, those of you on Team Replay, type in replay in the chat and let me know. I know a lot of you, the time zones, we're trying to balance students in Australia, students in China, students in California, across the globe. It's truly an international open access community. Let us know if you're on Team Replay. If you pop your questions in, even afterwards, this is a living, breathing event. We will catch up and cover those. So without further ado, I really want to jump in and bring Dirk on just briefly, and Elaine will bring you on a little bit later too. And Dirk, you just really welcome, tremendously happy to have you on the program and this Friday's live training. Would you mind taking a moment just to kind of share a little bit about your story, some things that you've grappled with as a first gen grad, and thanks again for your openness and willingness to share with the community here.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me, David. I'm very glad that I can share these stories. Also for other first generation graduate students who might be struggling with some of the similar issues. So first, let me tell everyone what I'm doing now. I'm currently a PhD student in social and political science at Bocconi University. But before that, I did a bachelor's in communication and a master's in media studies in the Netherlands. And then afterwards, a second master's in the United States at Duke University. So the first struggle for me actually was not even realizing that I was a first generation graduate student, right? So when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I didn't even know what this term meant. And for me, that meant not knowing what I was missing out on, right? And it was only later on during my graduate studies that I saw that some other graduate students were doing things a little bit differently than I was doing. And one of the first struggles that I was dealing with was, how do I spend my time right in graduate school? And coming from a working class background myself, the first thing that I was thinking of was I should probably do some work next to my studies. I should probably make sure to get enough money on the table, make sure I can pay my rent. But then I saw these other students doing all these extracurricular activities, and that for me sort of reminded me that I should probably be looking for other opportunities as well, because clearly I was missing out on some of these things. And Other struggles that I've dealt with later on during my graduate studies was, for example, well, you've talked about imposter syndrome. One of these things was being assertive in discussions. So I would have this seminar with a lot of different graduate students asking all of these questions, and I was thinking, well, I have this question looming in the back of my mind, but I'm not sure if this is a good question to ask. And then what would happen maybe 10 minutes after I was thinking that another student would ask that exact question, right? Um, so that's something that I mean, I'm still struggling with sometimes. I mean, it's not like I've overcome all of these issues yet. I'm still in the process of navigating all of these things. And other common things that I struggled with and still struggle with is, for example, asking for help, um, and being very apologetic when I do ask for help from professors, when actually it's really their job, for example, to mentor graduate students. So it's actually part of their job to answer these questions and to help you along the way. And once you start realizing that, I think it's easier to reach out to them and to actually ask for this help. So these are some things, some struggles that I've dealt with specifically. Um, I think what's also struggling, especially in the beginning, for me in the beginning of my graduate studies, I wasn't quite aware of all of the resources that are available. So this also relates to how you spend your time next to your studies, right? So of course you go to classes, you do the assignments, but then there's so much more that you can take advantage of. And I hadn't the slightest idea what those things were until later at Duke when I found a group of Duke first generation graduate students, and they really opened the door to more opportunities that I realized like, oh, wait a second, I could do this too, or I could do that too, or I could spend some time on volunteering in the library system, which also gives me new ideas or new opportunities along the way. So just in a nutshell are some of my struggles and my experience as a first gen, and I think that some of them might be relatable to the people who are joining today as well.
Look, Dirk, this is really helpful. Actually, you've covered a wide range of issues that I want to dig into a little more deeply. I want to come actually just in order because one of the things that you said that I think is quite common with a lot of first gen grads that we don't talk about enough is class. And right, class is sometimes this hidden variable in American society. You kind of have this idea of the American dream that anybody can go to rags to riches. And actually, in studies on inequality, education has been found as one of the key levers from living the American dream, going from rags to riches and having social mobility. But tell me a bit about some of the challenges you felt coming from a working class background, because I do think this is something that really overlaps with a lot of first gen grads. It might be the first right in their family to even go to undergrad, much less grad school. And then suddenly, I mean, I remember when I got up to Yale, I felt like, wow, where am I? I felt like a fish out of water. People are eating cucumber sandwiches and sipping tea. Right? This is just, I felt really kind of culturally foreign. I mean, I rightfully deserved to be there intellectually, but I really felt like I was very different from anybody else. Can you tell us a little bit about how you managed those kinds of feelings?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I recognize the feeling of being out of place, and specifically financially, especially at Duke, for example, I noticed that there are a lot of students who come from very well-off families, and you have all these micro gestures that signal that they have enough money, right? They go to the cantina, they spend a lot of money on food every day. You see them walking around with expensive coffees from Starbucks. And here I was spending, well, I wasn't spending that much money because I was making my own lunch and bringing it to graduate school. So these were some of the things that then I noticed. But also, for example, simple things, or well, simple but also fundamental things as finding housing. I noticed later on that most students lived in the vicinity of the campus, whereas I lived in a very bad neighborhood because I wanted to make sure that I didn't spend too much money on housing, which in the end was a very bad decision because it was a very bad neighborhood. um, but I think in terms of class, what also was very difficult is that I didn't really have any advice from my family on what to do, what to study. So it was also very difficult in the beginning when graduating high school to even pick a subject. because I
Mm.
had no idea. And I mean, I think I'm one of the stereotypical students that chose communication. I think this is one of these studies that is sort of renowned for the students who have no idea what they want to do. They enter a bachelor in communication. Um, yeah, I mean, it's you can also tell from other things, the way you dress, the way you talk, um, your prior knowledge. So I remember being in a seminar on political philosophy, and they would assume that you have this prior knowledge on, for example, classics and classic works in philosophy. But then actually, when they were talking about this and assuming this knowledge from every student in that
Mm.
seminar, I felt afraid to say, like, wait a second, could you actually elaborate on that? Because I don't have that prior knowledge. So I think there are also sometimes some assumptions in the way things are being taught that do not account for like variability in backgrounds and some of
Look,
the things you pick up
yeah,
in your
yeah,
youth, right?
I think that's really helpful. I mean, I had some of those same feelings. Like, well, I came from a small school in Texas, and I felt like my education really was deficient. It was one of the reasons I struggled. I was caught in a cycle of very bad, low quality education. And I think one of the things is then a lot of those feelings at first are inward, like, oh, I don't really belong here, or they're gonna find out about me, or they're going to realize I'm a fraud and kick me out of the program because I'm so different from anybody else. I don't have this background knowledge. And then it starts getting tangled up in other things that you mentioned. Oh, I don't want to ask this question because I don't want to sound dumb. And then I say somebody else actually asked that same question. And a lot
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
these feelings are bound up in this idea that you mentioned before of something called imposter syndrome, which I only later found out is that there's a label for it. Psychologists have studied it in depth, and it's something that's incredibly common, not just for first gen grads, but for grads as a whole. But it's especially true for first gen grads because there's so many reasons, whether that's around class, cultural change and differences, not having that family support you can turn to, that can really make you feel like you don't belong. And this imposter syndrome, if you don't nip that in the bud, it can really hold you back. It can hold you back from engaging in class. It can hold you back from seeking out resources that are there that you rightfully deserve to access. You're paying for, you're investing in. And it's one of the reasons that, right, there's inequality even within the same universities, that two students, same university, can have very different experiences of the same program. And that's why I want to talk a little bit more on imposter syndrome, because it's so important to tackle. And it sounds like, Dirk, you had some of those feelings too to try to address. Can you share a little bit about those feelings and what you've done proactively to try to deal with feelings of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think it's one of these very difficult things to address, because it will never you can never fully eliminate it, I think. But one of so I actually had so one of the most important things I did is, I think, is taking workshops where you learn practical skills, where you, for example, can enhance your public speaking skills, where you can enhance your writing skills, or taking part in discussions. But I think the most important thing for me has been the realization that we always think that other people know a lot more about subject A, but also the subject that, for example, we are experts on. Well, this is not true. So on the one hand, of course, we can learn more from our graduate peers, and I think we should always be very open to that. But I think we don't give ourselves enough credit that they can also learn from us. We assume that they know the things that we know, but oftentimes that's not true. And I think having that in the back of your mind really helps to remind yourself that you also know things that others do not know. So others can equally learn as much from you as you can learn from others. And I think if you're in a seminar setting with, or in a setting with other graduate students in your cohort, that's a very important takeaway that you should keep in the back of your mind.
Dirk, that's really helpful. And again, I see often those grad students who do speak up in seminars and can overcome those feelings of imposter syndrome, they get more attention from faculty. They get themselves on a fast track within the program because they're seen as these are the serious students. These are the ones who are really going to engage. And professors think, oh, this is worth investing my time and energy in this student because he'll absorb that information and make good use of it. I want to come just briefly and bring on Elaine. Elaine, who's joining us. Elaine, really good to have you here with us. Hey, Elaine. I just want to see if do any of these things that Dirk and I have been sharing for you as a first gen, do they relate to you? Can you tell us a little bit about your story and if you've had some of these feelings too? Oh, I think you're on mute, Elaine. Oh, unmute. No, you're unmuted. Oh, you might have to check. Oh, Elaine, you might have to check in your sound browser the volume the setting. If you go into the setting on the source, you might have to check it. Keep working on that, Elaine, and jump in when you're ready. In the meantime, I'm just going to keep going with Dirk here. Keep trying it, but we'll hear you when you jump on. So don't worry. This does, unfortunately, it's a different software, so don't worry. This does happen. But Elaine, if you can figure out in the settings your sound, we really want to bring you on and hear your story here. But just coming back, Dirk, no, I can't hear you, Elaine. As soon as we can hear you, I will let you know. You just have to change probably the audio source for yourself to make that happen. Keep troubleshooting it. So Dirk, I just want to keep going on some things that you talked about that kind of follow from imposter syndrome. And another thing that you mentioned is seeking help. So there's the point about being proactive and getting those extra resources and support available to you. But there's another layer here of really seeking help when you need it. And I wanted to hear a little bit about how that played out for you in terms of seeking help and trying to find professors when you had trouble, because then it's urgent. Then it really holds you back. Tell us a little bit about that.
So a story I can tell is when I did my first master's in the Netherlands in media studies, I was about to graduate and I had to write a thesis. And I remember my first thesis supervisor was very dismissive. And I was doing pretty well. I had nice grades, so I told her that I wanted to graduate with distinction. And she was very dismissive of that. And she told me like, well, Dirk, this is a nice goal, but only very, very good and very talented students graduate with distinction. So maybe that's not what you should focus on right now. And then in a weird turn of events, I was involved in a major accident and I had to recover from that. And it was a blessing in disguise because I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do with my studies. And then I decided to apply for a lot of scholarships and go to the United States. But what has been crucial for me is asking for help, indeed, from other professors. And I was very lucky when finding a good mentor. And when I decided, because I still had to write my thesis, of course, after the accident, but then I found a supervisor who was very helpful, who really supported my ambitions, my plans to go to the United States, and of course, the entire process of applying to universities and applying for all these scholarships. And that has been it has been a turning point in my academic career, because if it weren't for that one supervisor, things might have turned out a little bit different, right? Or entirely different. And then later on, when I was studying in the United States, it was an interdisciplinary master's, and my aim was to find out what sort of my career direction would be. And I found out that this would be political science. And then again, asking for help from a renowned political scientist has been this career change for me. That has been a deciding moment where I figured out like, hey, this is the direction I want to take. So I think that the most important takeaway is finding mentors who are really invested in you and in your ambitions and who take your ambitions seriously.
Dirk, I mean, that's hugely important. I think that is our point number two. Our nugget number one is combat imposter syndrome. Nugget number two is find a mentor. And that is critically important to your success. And this is something that doesn't just apply to first-gen grads, but grads, everybody who's watching this program right now. If you don't have a mentor, it is the most important thing you can do for your success as a grad. Now, one of the things I think is especially challenging for our first gen is finding those mentors. Because one thing that happened with students who have parents or others who have this experience, they kind of ask those questions over the dinner table. Hey, who are you working with? Have you what's your relationship like with your supervisor? Others may not quite have that same support and experience and know-how. So, Dirk, how did you know to look for a mentor? Where did this idea come from? Because this is one of the things that helps some students get on the fast track while others kind of bump along, can't ever find a topic, can't ever seem to get started. where did this, how did this dawn on you?
That's a very good question. I don't want to underestimate the role of luck in this, because one of the huge elements that, in my story at least, was luck. Just being lucky that there were these people in the vicinity of my academic career. But I will say that what really helps is finding professors that you've taken classes with. That's, I think, a good heuristic, and particularly those that have been somewhat inspirational. Because for me, it was I picked this this second thesis supervisor because I remember that our courses were really well structured. I really enjoyed taking her courses. So then she would also be more receptive for topics that were similar to her topics. So that's another maybe useful way to look at it. Find mentors who do something that is similar to your own research agenda. Then later on, I mean, at Duke, it was quite similar that I had taken a course with my supervisor, and then from then onward, he recommended me to take his other course. And so I became interested in what he taught and what kind of research he did, but vice versa, I also became more interested in what kind of research topics I was interested in, because he, I can only assume, knew that these research topics were developed from his courses.
Yeah, but let me be more concrete. So then so the course is, I think, a great way and a natural meeting point to connect with a mentor. You know, they're teaching this course because it's something that they're an expert on, and probably they're also passionate about. And if you do well in the course, ask good questions is a way to stand out. But how did you take it that next step? Because a mentor is really somebody who invests in your success, kind of takes you a bit under their wing, shows you the ropes, and connects you with resources in the field, opens doors, can provide you emotional support. There are different things mentor do. If you guys don't have a mentor, we've got a dedicated set of trainings on how to identify a mentor and also how to connect with them. But yeah, how did you relationship to that next level?
Well, I mean, what certainly helped is if you do well in their courses, but also ask meaningful questions in these seminars that they teach. But I'm not sure, for me, if there was a very clear and structured way to get to know these mentors. These things for me develop more organically and with a little bit of luck. So this is something that I'm very curious what you have to say about that, and if you have any tips for that, because I clearly have been very lucky in my academic career finding these people. So I think you have to do a little bit more of an extra job to find them, and maybe you don't really know who you want to work with or who you want your mentor to be. Then I think you could benefit from a more structured approach. But you probably have.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, Elaine. Okay,
Sure,
there you go.
Elaine.
We can finally hear you. Gary, good. It's working now. Come back in.
So, I've got a whole bunch of sticky notes, but I will just, Dirk, on your point is, because I'm an introvert and I was never comfortable performing in classes, especially male-dominated theory classes. I mean, I use Foucault's name as a swear word to keep myself real. And I'm the same, Dirk. And you, David, I didn't have any of this background education. But what I did was, when I was an undergrad, I took some graduate level classes. And then what I did was, which made some people unhappy, but whatever. I started talking about presenting my research when I was an undergrad. And I didn't know I would ever go to grad school or anything. And by doing that, I suppose that's the way I dealt with imposter syndrome, although I've never felt, in what I've read about imposter syndrome, I've never really felt that way, because I've been on the outside all the time. So I didn't become part of these cliques. And so I just want to bring something up that's really important, because I'm coming to you from Canada. So in my work, one of the things is we're challenging language, and we're challenging first generation, that language itself, because it assumes our ancestral and kinship knowledge doesn't matter. And so I really want to put that out there, because we do come with amazing knowledge and lived experiences and ways of being, that just because they're not honored in these elitist places doesn't mean they don't matter. And so I'm also coming from not just a perspective of a country that's been colonized by the British and French empires, but we're looking at my work is all with women whose lives are shaped by persistent poverty and how Canadian universities exclude us and marginalize us. So that's sort of like, that's the lens from which I'm coming from. And one of the struggles we have in Canada is, unlike the United States and places in Europe and Australia, we don't have any initiatives in place to get students from poverty to university and try to help us here. So the biggest struggle I have had always in school is not having community. It has been devastating not to have community. So in our research, I say our because it's participatory. We created what we call the Underclass Sisterhood of Solidarity. And that community was a game changer. If I would have had community of people who look like me, and I'm not just talking my skin color, with the same sharing those lived experiences, it would have been so different. Because one of the things I've had to deal with is a lot of social class or underclass poverty, however you want to say it, gaslighting. So you work too much, so that means that you're not dedicated. You're always hustling for jobs. You're always worried about what your future is going to be. I use project management to try to finish on time. So these things, in feeling like that outsider, is just simply no community. So I'm just trying to imagine David knowing you 4 years ago. Because when things went sideways, there was nowhere to go. And so, of course, in gaslighting, I start taking all this personally. I've got a whole bunch of notes. One of the things I would, hopefully we get to this piece, is charity, colonial charity.
Yeah, so Elaine, it's super helpful. I want to keep the focus on
Yep.
right a lot of the grads, because when you talk about community, again, that's one of the reasons that I created this community. It's nothing really beats face-to-face interaction, but here we are spanning several continents, and I want that this is a critical community and a base of mutual support where we can have these open conversations. And I think one of the challenges as a first-gen grad that you do realize, and I realized this, especially going from Texas to Yale and on the East Coast, that I was also leaving behind a familiar community. And as I was undergoing a transformation, I was also starting to become different from people back home. And I really, when it started, not only did I feel out of place at Yale, but when I would go back home, I started to feel out of place. Like I no longer even fit in my home community where I came from. And that was very strange, because I suddenly found myself feeling rootless and rudderless. And that's where I think, Elaine, what you're saying about having a community, and if you don't have a community, maybe even going so far as creating one, we have one here for that purpose, or as what Dirk has done, also finding those mentors, and you're a dream team of support that can help you. I mean, Dirk, can you relate to some of those rudderless feelings? Even as maybe you were doing well, you started to find other things back home maybe felt a bit awkward or strained.
Yeah, so thank you, Elaine, for sharing also your perspectives. I want to respond to 2 points. I mean, the first thing you said is that we should dismiss the knowledge from our previous generations, right? And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think one of the advantages, so far we haven't talked about the advantages of being a first gen. One of the advantages for me has been that I put a lot of effort in thinking about how to communicate my research ideas or my research plans in a more general way, right? To make it sure that it's even communicable beyond my own discipline. So I did want to point that out, that I think that this is one of the big advantages of being the first gen, is that you have this broader way of communicating your research. And I think we should try to take full advantage of that. Second, your point about community, I think, is also spot on. And it wasn't, I mean, I didn't even realize that I was the first generation student until I found this community. And from then onward, it was that I started making the most of these opportunities that were there for me, or the resources that were there for me that before that I didn't know about. So I think these are excellent points. And that's also the moment where I felt that I belonged in this place, because of course it can be very alienating to be this to come from this low income family and be surrounded by all this wealth. But then you also start realizing that there are actually more people like you just didn't know. So it also keeps you in check that sometimes it's very easy to make judgments based on appearance, while actually I think at Duke, for example, there were, I don't know the exact percentages, but there's a considerable amount of people coming from low income backgrounds who are helped with financial aid, right? So there are more people out there like yourself.
So I just want to add to what you're talking about. So if you're in universities in my country and you can't, there aren't those communities that exist. And Dirk, you were talking about professors. I had a professor, I'm going to say his name because his name needs to be said, Richard Westerman at the University of Alberta. And I always tease and say his first word wasn't mama, it was Hegel or something. The guy is just a genius with theory. And I was in his class and something happened that was very social class based. Students were making fun of me because I was sitting there in a work uniform, and he emailed me. And that was one of those moments when you knew, oh, this is what a professor looks like who looks like me. And then I glommed onto him. So it's being attentive to how they talk, how they tell stories, because there's so much destigmatizing work has to be done around first gen, low income, poverty, however you want to talk about it. But then he was able to introduce me to some other profs who look like me. And the more I talked about it, then more profs would come out of the closet.
Yeah,
so
that's an
if you
extremely good point. Yeah.
So if you were to tell me to ask me the one thing that has made all the difference, it is creating this community and finding community. There is no other way. I don't know how else to be in this world without that, and what that community looks like. And David, there's a great article that came out a while ago about, no, it is, I'll send it to you. It's all beautiful poetry about, we just don't leave behind our families and communities. And when we try to, it has horrible consequences for us.
Elaine, I would love for you to share that. I know people watching would love to read that in the community. So if you share that in the Facebook group, I think people will really, really appreciate that resource. I want to continue because a lot of these are common challenges. I want to give people who are watching some practical advice to deal with some of the feelings of imposter syndrome. Elaine, I know you mentioned maybe you had a little bit less of that, but Dirk and I did. And one of the things I want to encourage all of you who are feeling some imposter syndrome to remember is that you belong there. You are equally worthy of being there. And sometimes when these negative feelings or thoughts creep in, that others are better, that you don't belong, you're not going to fit, that hold you back, I find it helpful to just have a running list of reasons that you can remind yourself of why you deserve to be in that room just as much as anybody else who's there. And if you have to, whenever those negative thoughts creep in, take a look at that list and remind yourself, counterbalance those negative thoughts. Because one thing I do want to tell you is those negative thoughts I have seen are common in some of the very best grad students. Because one of the things that happens when you get to a new place and you start on this journey is you realize how much you don't know, how big the mountain is that you've got to climb, how small you are in the field. I mean, Elaine was talking about our genius professor, Richard Westerman, and that can make any grad student feel small because you're realizing, well, I'm trying to become like these guys one day. How am I ever going to get there? So remember, even Richard started at the point where we're at one day way back then. So write down that list. And that's one of my top tips. That's helped a lot of my students when those feelings come in. And the second thing is just to recognize it. And instead of treating this as a sign that you're not good enough, think about when you have these feelings that this is a sign that I'm being stretched, that I'm getting my money's worth out of grad school because I'm pushing myself. It's like any stretch. A stretch is a little painful, and at the beginning you might feel very stiff, and over time with practice it gets better and better. So give yourself a little bit of grace to accept that this is just a normal, natural part of the process. And if you were just complacent sitting at home and not pushing yourself, you wouldn't encounter these feelings. You're only encountering these feelings because you're growing. So yeah, just want to give that support. We've also got some questions in here. One came from Amina, and I want to see Dirk and Elaine if you had some suggestions here for Amina in the group, which says one of the most difficult thing is when you don't have anyone to help you choose what field would be good for you. That was my biggest struggle for my undergrad. Yeah, what would you say to Amina?
I agree. And I mean, I'm not sure if there's something within immediate grasp that with which you can resolve that. I think talking with other persons beside your own direct family, find people who might be in your network, friends of parents, other students, parents of other students, I think you need to broaden your network and see if there's anyone in that network who might be able to share some thoughts with you about this. Because I think even though you might not have a very clear idea about what you want to do, there are maybe some certain interests you have developed in high school, some passions, some things that you've done after school time. So I think these could be great conversation starters if you start this conversation with someone outside of your network. I don't want to discredit that your immediate family isn't able to help you with that, but it maybe helps you to make a little bit broader sense of where you might want to go. I don't know if Elaine maybe can respond to that.
So I will say two things. So with my work, I actually don't have a home because I do look at the sociology of higher education, and there actually isn't a discipline where I'm at for that. So I'm just kind of floating around. So, but how I chose my research is something that made me so angry, and that is poverty discrimination in Canadian universities. And I knew I didn't have the language or understanding that it was a problem, but no, for the fact that women couldn't go to school and poverty kept going. That was what, so I always tell students, pick something you're passionate about because you're going to be married to it for a while. But the other piece of practical advice I will give you, and it'll come back to what David said, librarians are your best friends. At the university I'm at, I have met 2 librarians who look like me, and they know stuff. They know disciplines that I didn't even know existed. David's right, we're paying for this anyway. Honest to goodness, librarians love students. They're not going to tell you that you're a loser and you don't have a right to be there, but book an appointment. And even if you have to talk to 10 different ones before you find a librarian you love, when you find that librarian you love, sit down and have a conversation.
Elaine, I'm so happy you mentioned that, because I want to turn into something Dirk and I wanted to chat about as well. Some of the hidden resources that students don't even know are available to them in the university, that you can get great power and potential out of. I just want to cap off that comment about finding a topic. I mean, one of the reasons a mentor is so important is that it can help you find your path. And so sometimes grabbing onto a mentor and finding that relationship, it takes some active search. It's critically important. It's one of the reasons there's this Matthew effect in science, where kind of the rich get richer and the poor fall behind. The Matthew effect has been well documented. We have a dedicated training on it, so you guys can understand how people are getting unfair advantages in science. But effectively, the mentors who are right at the center of debates in their field, if you connect with them and you're an elite institution, they connect their students right to the center of those debates and get them on a winning path. Now, you don't have to be at an elite institution to get that process to work for you, but you do need to find a mentor. And that's one of the steers some of the students get that first-gen grads don't always take advantage of. So let me turn now to the librarians, though, because this is really important. So yeah, well, I remember one thing I encountered that I felt, and we talked about advantages of being a first-gen grad. When I was at Yale, I felt there were a lot of incredibly wealthy students. I had like Vanderbilt next to me in one of my classes, and a Rockefeller in another one, and one of the Bush daughters. And I felt like some of them were very entitled, and they had a silver spoon mentality. And there were a lot of resources available to them that they just left untapped and untouched. And I kind of had the mentality, I thought, man, this is like, I've got to squeeze as much life as I can out of this institution as possible. And Elaine mentioned one of those resources. So one is meeting with professors. So many students don't take advantage of office hours. Professors open their door to you. And I can tell you as a professor, this year I taught a class, and I would say, of my office hours, I've had 3 students book appointments with me to come meet with me. Things that students outside the university pay for to have sessions and that kind of one-to-one structured support. You're paying for that in your university. It's really kind of shame on you if you don't take advantage of your world-leading faculty who are willing to meet with you, help with you, and often that's a carte blanche for building a mentorship relationship. The other thing Elaine mentions is librarians, and it's something that a lot of my students in the fast track community have begun to take advantage of. Those librarians often are sitting alone in the library drinking coffee. Students don't use the research resources. It's like having personal research assistants who can help you. And Susan, I know you mentioned you invited Elaine to the group. I know Susan has become best friends with her research librarians at University of West Indies, or maybe also a headache for them because she kind of discovered that a lot of the electronic resources that should have been there had gathered too much dust on the shelf and weren't working as they should have. But it's really a tremendously powerful resource. Dirk, Elaine, tell us about some other hidden resources that you found. Office hours, the research librarians are definitely two important ones. There's a career services offices often in universities that can help, and even sometimes grant funding, extra funding internal to the university, scholarships and internships that students don't even know are available. But yeah, Dirk and Elaine, would you be happy to share some other resources that you found that you sometimes feel others don't take advantage of?
So you talked about career counseling. This is something that really helped me when I was in the process of doing a PhD application. So they really helped structure what I should do, what kind of steps I needed to take to sort of make sure that this was all going well. Also, don't underestimate taking advantage of psychological services. So it's called counseling, CAPS, counseling and psychological services. For example, if you feel like if studying is not going well, or if you feel unrest, you're anxious, I think a really great step is to make sure that you use the psychological services, the resources available, because it really helps you, for example, to become more mindful, to address certain things that are in the way of being productive or being just healthy or happy. For example, one of the things that was a very important takeaway for me is getting enough sleep. One of these things that you can easily compromise on when you're in graduate school, right? And then I realized, like, wait, if I make some adjustments to my sleep schedule, things actually went a lot better, and I turned out to be a lot more happy and productive. Also, don't underestimate the power of joining extracurricular groups or extracurricular activities. So I'm very glad, Elaine, that you hyped up the library, because one of the things that I did was join the library advisory board. And not only did it allow me to connect with other students, but also it allowed me to really get to know what kind of resources are available at the library. So that for me was personally a very useful way to recognize what kind of resources I could use to my own benefit in my academic career.
Mm-hmm. Really good. Elaine, do you have any other thoughts? I can see you're taking some more sticky notes there.
Well, I love stickies. COVID's been horrible because I don't get free stickies anymore from the university. So one of the things, and it just ties in to Dirk, which is important, is I know our medical systems are different, but in Canada, most universities have doctors' offices, and you'd be surprised how many doctors are first gen. And when you have a doctor's first gen, it really can make all the difference. I want to talk about just briefly about volunteering, because it can be a sensitive area, because if you can't afford to do it. So if you're my advice from painful experience is choose volunteer work really carefully. Because it can turn into a full-time job, and then you can end up not paying your rent. But those volunteer, like I've been a graduate student representative on a lot of hiring committees because I wanted to know what happens at those big, huge tables that's not in the literature review. The other thing, a resource that all first-generation students have is skills that we don't learn inside the classroom. So I have leveraged my graphic design skills, for example, to not only make money, but to also make connections with professors to get them engaged with my research. One of the most important pieces of advice I'm going to give to first-gen students is write a proposal for funding. So let's say it's a scholarship or it's a grant or bursary or whatever it is. Get it down pat, and then just start churning it out. I got so good at it that it would take me half an hour to apply for these things. Lots of times you're not going to get it, but that one time you do, you're emotionally removed from it. You'll apply and forget, because as David said, there's so much out there that students don't tap into. And if you can spend a half an hour just rejigging an application, and that can get you $1,000, that can mean the difference between staying in school and not staying in school.
100%. Elaine, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think a lot of first gens also try to balance working while going to school. And they feel like, well, I've got one hand tied behind my back compared to these other rich students who, aren't trying to balance all this. And sometimes one way around that is seeking these funding sources that are right there on the table. If you think about, okay, for $1,000, if I can spend 4 or 5 hours preparing an application, that's better than working, right, a low-paid job that might be 100 hours to get that same amount.
And what's critical, and I wouldn't have believed this, and David, you know this, and Dirk, you'll know this, is that money begets money. So if I get that $500 scholarship, I get to put that on my CV, and I apply for a scholarship worth $1,000, and all of a sudden my application is getting noticed in a way it wouldn't otherwise. Yeah. So this is really important, and just on I really want to bring this up so I don't forget, on tapping into all these resources. We may think that we don't have anything to put on a CV, the fancy word for a resume, but we do have so much more than we don't realize. And we need to seek out support to tap into that, to make our resume CVs for all these applications look awesome, because we have so much more, but we think if it doesn't look academic, it doesn't matter. And so, David, I would really like you to touch on that piece, because it's a constant problem.
Well, you've just highlighted, just stepping back for a second, on money begets money. That's the Matthew effect in science. Success begets success, and that's why I want to talk about the fast track, getting you on that right track. The CV, fortunately in Fast Track, we've got some template resources for CVs. So if that's something scary to approach, we have these community resources that's worked well for my students, has worked well for me personally, and that's all open access. If you are looking for that, send me a DM, and I will make sure either myself personally or my assistant Ashley connects you with those resources to help you. And this is one thing you've kind of transitioned me here, Elaine, to talk about the third thing I want to bring up. And that's the importance, I think, especially at first gens, to make a roadmap or master plan, to say, kind of define for yourself, okay, I want to go to London. This is where I want to get to. And a way to check yourself to see, okay, wait a second, this is taking me to Frankfurt. I'm going off course. To stay on track. Because there's so many things that will pull you in different directions that are not providing value for your career, that are very easy to get sucked into. And some of them might seem like very tempting. Say, I had professors say, "Oh, can you organize this conference?" It would have been a massive amount of work for free, and I thought, "Oh, this professor's interested in me," but really he just was having me do volunteer, low-paid work, like Elaine was saying, to be careful of, and that wasn't getting me that I would have ended up in Frankfurt. I wouldn't have ended up in London. So I do encourage you guys all. It's one thing that too many grads in general don't do. That's my third nugget for you: is make a roadmap. Think it can always change, update it every 3 months, every 6 months, but at least say, okay, this is where I'm trying to get to in the medium term. Maybe that's grad school. Maybe that's to a postdoc. Maybe that's just to finishing your thesis. Think about the most important thing you need to do over the next 3 months to get there, and have a laser-like focus on achieving that. And make yourself indistractable. But that roadmap is critically important, and I think I lost a lot of time because I didn't know to make one as a graduate student. Dirk, Elaine, I'm going to come here. We've got some comments coming through. One says, interesting, never thought of asking a librarian. That's great. Really happy to see that that's helpful. Susan has a comment here saying that I wish I'd majored in the discipline I liked most as an undergrad. Perhaps I didn't because of a poverty mindset. I didn't see how I could make income from that discipline. Elaine, do you want to comment on that one there?
Well, I ended up going in. Oh, my cat's got the heebie-jeebies. Okay, I ended up going into sociology, and I ended up critiquing the very institution I'm trying to get a degree at. So, but I did the trajectory of becoming an accountant first, because that's what I could get a job in, and it made me miserable. A therapist a long time ago said, "Do what you love, and the money will follow." And I know that was before we live in this gig economy and stuff. But if we're going to, it's not just the money we spend, but it's lost opportunity costs along the way. Let's do what we love, and it's never too late. I'm 56 years old and going to be defending in December, and I'm pretty scared about what's facing me out there. Do what you love. It's so critical. And listen to the roadmap piece, okay? So important to listen to that roadmap piece. I've made a lot of mistakes when I should have said no. So I just want to reinforce what David said.
Yeah, that power of saying no, I think, is something really hard just starting out. There was a really nice comment that came from Irir here. Irir says, one thing that helped me was to learn from more advanced first-gen peers. They can also become valuable mentors. Dirk, I think this really speaks to some comments you were making earlier, also you, Elaine, about the power of community. And mentors don't have to just be professors. Mentors can be other graduate students. And I think that sometimes people, when they think of a mentor, they go look at the most prominent guru in their field. Oftentimes they're terrible about being mentors because they're too busy and they don't care. You need somebody who's willing and qualified to connect you with what you need. And I love this comment, Ariri, because it's so true. Dirk, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, it wasn't until I met this community of first gen graduate students that I realized, oh, wait a second, I think I'm a first gen graduate student too. So these other graduate students surely helped me, one, realizing that, but also two, taking the necessary steps to sort of address some of these challenges and then finding the opportunities to work on that. So I agree. Also, what I found really nice, and this is what Elaine talked about earlier. If you open up this conversation at your university about being a first gen, you also realize that indeed beyond just graduate students, that are also faculty members who are first gen. So yeah. But I agree. I mean, it's first gen peers that can also be extremely helpful in your academic career and who can really set you on the right track, so to say. Yeah.
So for me, because out of necessity, I had to learn about policy rules, which has nothing to do with my research, but just out of necessity. So I started reading university calendars and between the lines and stuff that we don't know about, and started sharing that information with my peers that I was learning that, did you know that there's ways around these rules that you're being told are hard and fast? And I will share this on your Facebook group, David, but in Spain, they have a school, it's virtual, and some in person, Campus Rom, and it's by and for the Roma. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's those who are ahead, mentor those that are coming up behind them. It includes family, it includes all this. But my greatest mentors are people who look like me. In my research, there are women who are a few years behind me in school and are teaching me stuff that I can, thank goodness they're mentoring me. So it's not about I'm first year and you're third year, David, or anything like that. What we can learn together, and attend anything free you can, from where you can get free food on campus because there's leftovers, to free webinars, just saying.
Yeah, I definitely ate a lot of pizza as a grad student. A lot of free seminars. That went away with COVID. Let me keep going though. And food hygiene, because there was a comment agreeing with Dirk here from Lydiane. Totally agree. Sleep well is crucial to have your mind fresh and focus. And I think sometimes one thing I see with first gens is sometimes not setting those right boundaries. We were talking about saying no, but going in cycles that can put you towards a burnout of throwing yourself fully into something, but in a pace that's not sustainable, that then can lead to a crash down the road, and then feeling bad about yourself and that you haven't gotten things done, or maybe you missed a deadline, and then jumping right back in and trying to go, and then same cycle repeats. So part of this, sleeping well, is a sign of setting some limits at night, maybe getting off the socials. Dirk, we were talking about just before jumping on here, how you actually got rid of Facebook and Instagram, something, I only open up these socials to create this community. In fact, before that too, I maintain a no social rule, an hour when I wake up in the morning and an hour before bed, just to make sure I unplug and sleep. So I set my intention for the next day, and I find I can sleep like a baby every night if I do that. But I think a lot of people do struggle with sleep in managing a lot of the stress that comes with a lot of new experiences, challenges, and feeling out of place. How did you balance that, Dirk? What did you do? Also, Elaine, to make sure you get good sleep at night.
So definitely unplugging, making sure that at least an hour before bedtime, you just stop staring at screens. So I think it depends from person to person. So personally, what really helps for me is reading, just reading a novel. It doesn't even have to be that interesting. It's just something that takes your mind off of things. Because this also relates to, especially if you come from a like a working class or low income family, that you always have this idea that you have to work hard to get things done, and then you end up in this cycle where you do indeed work hard, you maybe pull an all-nighter, not realizing that it's extremely paradoxical, because if you then don't get enough sleep, you need to work harder because you don't have the cognitive capacity, right? Because you didn't get enough sleep. So you enter this vicious cycle where you have to work harder and harder and harder and set yourself up for a burnout. So I think having these boundaries is actually more productive. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And it's not always so much celebrated. But actually setting these boundaries and making sure that you get enough sleep sets you up to be very productive. Um, but yeah, I think it depends from person to person how you make sure that you get enough sleep. But for me personally, reading before bed is works excellent. Yeah.
I've been really PhD school it feels like it's physiologically changed me. So I'm in a city with a housing crisis and living precariously, so sleep is really difficult. But I don't drink coffee and I don't drink pop. I drink gallons of water, which is probably one of the things that's helped me. I only use social media for my research or to post pictures of my cats. But one of the things that does help me sleep is like not having computers and all that as much as I can. But if I have something due and I really don't think I'm going to get it done, I don't go to bed with that on my mind. I've gotten better at dealing with those problems right away. So David, you're a teacher, you would go to your teachers, go to your supervisors well in advance and say, you know what, I'm trying, but I just know I'm not going to make this deadline. That can be the greatest thing to getting sleep. And whether you're a morning person or a night person, just so important. And I wish I could sleep well. I miss being able to sleep. And I know it affects me emotionally, not just mentally, but it really, really is bad for my depression and anxiety when I'm exhausted.
I think, Elaine, I think a lot. I'm really thank you for being open and sharing that, because I think a lot of people watching right now can relate to those challenges and those real struggles. I can certainly relate to being up at night knowing I've got a deadline or something I've got to do. It's not done, and my mind's just running, and I'm getting more anxious. Then I'm watching the clock, seeing that I'm losing sleep. I'm going to be worse off and feeling more anxious. And it's
Are you
bad
beating
cycle.
yourself up for being a loser?
Yeah.
Oh God, why did I procrastinate? And
yeah.
Yeah.
So what I've done to deal with that is at night I make my list of what I'm gonna do, and I used to do it besides bed. Now I do it, if you got the space in some other room from where the bed is, make my list there, and it's almost like that act of physicality of just removing it from me and putting it on that list, that I have a game plan for the next morning, gives me a sense of peace. It gives me a feeling of a sense of control that I've got a plan for dealing with it. And if you don't have a plan for dealing with it, find one during the day. But you don't want to be trying to, be up at night dealing with your plan. That's when you've got to really rest and recharge so you can be your best the next day. And Elaine, I like what you said a lot. If you go to your professors in advance, not when it's the last minute, but if I've had students come to me, say 2 weeks in advance, say, hey, I've got midterms, I've got other things that I'm stressed with, I'm not going to meet this deadline and be able to do everything well. It's too much. And I just extended, not just for one student, but I realized that, well, that's probably applying to a lot of my students right now, extending the entire deadline for the class so that no one was getting special or unfair treatment, extending the entire deadline by a week. And so, even as a professor, we need that information too. And we're not robots. We understand, and I want to read you doing good work. So if you come to me far in advance of the deadline, let me know it's an issue. That looks way better than kind of when you're really in a panic back against the wall. But yeah, those sleep strategies really helped. And Anita, glad to hear that you're finding these suggestions valuable. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was really great. Here's another comment on sleep that came out. There are, okay, I'm not sure I'm fully understanding this one. I think sleep depends on the person. Night focus, others morning focus. Totally. So, I mean, I do think you want to try to aim for getting yourself at least at least four full sleep cycles. If you don't know what I'm talking about in full sleep cycles, we've got a training actually on sleep hygiene that I'd love to connect you with. So DM me about sleep hygiene. It's just something fundamental that we all need, but you want to make sure you get at least 4 sleep cycles, and that corresponds to a minimum of 6 hours. Everybody can vary around that, but at a minimum, you need some deep REM, you need some deep sleep, and you need some REM sleep. And 4 cycles is what you want to get there. And where we are just running out of time, we are exactly at an hour. So I think this is not a bad place to stop. Dirk, Elaine, thank you so much for joining. I think we might do a second, if there's interest from the community, we might do a follow-up session on some of these dedicated topics. So comment below if there's more, if you'd like to hear more of this, you'd like to hear more from Elaine and Dirk, and if you have some burning issues here in the space of special challenges you face as a first gen finding community, do comment that below. Remember some of the 3 things that I've suggested, these 3 nuggets that will really help you. One big one is combat imposter syndrome, and we've got some tips for doing that. Find a mentor, and we've got strategies to help you do it. And so doing, take advantage of the resources available to you in your university. We've learned librarians can be your best friend, and make a roadmap to help you stay on track. Guys, if any of you want to work together in a more accelerated way and tap into the power of community, do send me a DM. Let's get on a call, 100% free, and chat so I can connect you to some of the resources available to you here in this group that will help you get on that proverbial fast track in your research academic career. And you guys, Elaine, Dirk, I'm going to be in the DMs responding to a lot of people just after this. Please feel free to join and do so. Just wonderful feedback. Guys, look forward to seeing you as ever next Friday, same time, always right here, the topics you care about most in grad school. All right, everybody, have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Bye, bye, bye.